Introduction asterisk. I am the descendant of the true dragon. I am the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. So roared Viserys Targaryen. Yet, he met his end with a molten crown piercing his skull, succumbing to absurdity and disgrace. However, he did not truly perish. Upon awakening, he was no longer the cowardly and tyrannical beggar king, but rather a colossal dragon, a golden entity with wings ablaze, a fiery Viserion. His name was born from himself. Daenerys Targaryen caressed his scales, whispering softly, "Viserion, my brother's name." Unbeknownst to her, this dragon comprehended her words, and little did she realize, the steed upon her back was her unworthy brother. He once yearned for the throne, yet lost everything due to his inadequacy. Now, he possessed the power to raise cities but no longer required crown. He was no longer the derided exile. He embodied flame and destruction, the essence of the dragon, the true dragon. When the army of the White Walkers descended, the Night King resurrected him as an ice dragon, and he soared, wings eclipsing the sky. This time he did not fight for Daenerys, nor for the Targaryens. He flew solely for freedom. Others might ride dragons to claim kingship, but he, in essence, was the king. You say I am unworthy of the Iron Throne? Now, I am the throne itself. 1. Transformation into a dragon asterisk asterisk. Pain. From the crown of his head, molten magma flowed down, the searing agony obliterating any sensation of the molten stream coursing over his face, with only an unbearable torment expanding infinitely. He struggled madly, but it was futile. The arms gripping his shoulders were as heavy as fate itself. Golden liquid poured over him, and he finally attained the coveted golden crown. Viserys seemed to catch the scent of roasting meat, yet he could no longer discern whether the aroma emanated from the roasted delicacies on the table before Drogo or from his own visage. Before darkness fully enveloped him, the last image he beheld was that of the girl who had now become a woman. The silver-haired, violet-eyed woman gently caressed her slightly protruding abdomen, gazing intently at him, her expression serene, as if she were an eternity away. "Wretched woman," he screamed, his voice a thunderous echo. The fury within him burned like fire, even more intensely than the boiling gold, but beneath the surface of that boiling rage lay an undeniable despair. He was not a true dragon. True dragons fear not the flames. Yet even as he lost consciousness, the scorching pain clung to him like a nightmare. Not just his head, but his body, arms, and legs. Every inch of skin seemed to partake in the feast of flames. That barbarian was indeed generous, not only crafting a golden crown, but seemingly intending to forge a golden armor for him as well. Viserys felt the oppressive force subside, yet he lacked the strength to struggle. He was unwilling to accept that he, a true dragon's descendant, the legitimate ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, could not glimpse the image of his homeland. All he could see in the darkness was his own demise. The searing heat melted away Viserys' anger and pride, and without these two pillars, he could no longer lift his head or straighten his back. The pain gradually numbed, and consciousness faded. "Sleep," he urged himself. "Sleep, for perhaps in dreams, I may return to Westeros, to Dragonstone, to the Iron Throne, to the splendor of the Targaryens." But just as he contemplated surrendering, a surge of warmth erupted from the depths of his being. This wave of heat differed from the external blaze, where it passed. It brought not destruction, but rather tempered his sinews, as if through forging. Viserys' drifting consciousness suddenly felt the union of inner and outer fervor, as old muscles turned to ash, replaced by new ones growing rapidly. He disregarded the pain of destruction and rebirth. His previously tranquil heart now surged with incredulous joy. His heart, which had ceased its rhythm, now beat violently. Viserys felt his body brimming with vigor. This overwhelming strength compelled him to roar and to soar. Suddenly, a glimmer of light appeared in his pitch-black vision. First, it was a slender crack, and then the darkness shattered, flames filling his sight. Viserys, disregarding the evident anomaly, eagerly stretched his limbs and surged toward the light. He cried out, "Ah!" The sound emerging from his throat startled him. Yet there was no time for contemplation. He beheld Daenerys standing amidst the flames, her hair and garments engulfed by the fiery tongues, her body marred with blood and ash. The noble princess of House Targaryen stood bare, her shimmering silver hair entirely consumed, yet her beauty remained unscathed. Daenerys! Anger and hatred momentarily ceased as he dashed forward, only to release another bizarre cry. "Ah!" Upon hearing his own voice, he abruptly halted. The flames receded, and the unusual sensation became increasingly hard to ignore. Viserys gazed up at his sister. When had she grown so tall? He stepped back, only to discover he was suspended in midair, propelled by a pair of wings. "Blow my blood." From a distance, voices called out, and Viserys understood the meaning of that Dothraki phrase. Unconsciously, he flapped his wings, soaring high above, witnessing the barbarian kneeling in fear and reverence. At that moment, a hand gently caressed his back. It was a warm and soft touch, and Viserys instinctively leaned closer. He heard ah, similar to the sounds he had just produced, as two small dark figures flew through the lingering smoke. Yet he had no time to ponder their identity. The most familiar yet foreign woman before him captivated his attention. "Viserion, will you be called Viserion in memory of my poor brother?" In those violet, gentle eyes, Viserys saw his own reflection. His head, his neck, his body, his wings, and his tail. A dragon. He had truly transformed into a dragon. 2. The majestic dragon, ***. Pale yellow scales adorned him, with golden horns, wing bones, and a spine. His fangs were 2 rows of gleaming black blades, and his eyes glimmered like molten gold. Viserys, or rather Viserion, after a day and night, finally confirmed his identity amidst the curiosity and awe of the onlookers. This was no dream. Since the era of the dragon's curse, dragons had not graced the earth again. Any attempts to restore them had become the subject of mockery. The Targaryen family waned with the disappearance of dragons. Yet now, 3 living dragons had emerged once more, heralding an unspoken significance. His ambitions reignited. He unfurled his wings and let out a resounding roar toward the heavens. He recalled the glorious feats of the Targaryens' founding. Aegon and his 2 sisters had once soared over the narrow sea on 3 dragons, conquering the continent of Westeros. Now was the time for him to resurrect the grandeur of his ancestors. He ascended into the sky, flying westward toward Westeros. Then, he fell into Daenerys' grasp. Daenerys playfully poked at his wings, laughing, "You flew so high." Viserion was consumed by a mix of shame and fury. He elongated his neck and roared at the woman's face, yearning to unleash dragon fire, to scorch her hypocritical visage, to let her experience the true wrath of a sleeping dragon. But only a wisp of black smoke escaped his mouth. To his dismay, her face bore no trace of the terror he had hoped for. Instead, her eyes widened in delight. Those violet eyes, reminiscent of the man he once was. But now things had changed. He had become a magnificent dragon. All mortals ought to bow before him. Yet simultaneously, he had to concede that he was still too small, unable to breathe fire, let alone fly high or far. A mere hand could easily grasp him. He needed to grow quickly. Dany rode ahead on her petite white steed, while Viserion stood proudly upon her shoulder, envisioning himself as her mount. Drogon and Rhaegal were confined within a makeshift cage, suspended beside the saddle. Viserion had once permitted these 2 dragons to bow before him, yet they proved ungrateful, particularly Drogon, who audaciously attempted to bite his tail, a truly egregious offense. Though they were beasts, they remained his dragons. Considering Drogon's robust physique, Viserion chose not to hold a grudge against him. Observing their imprisonment brought Viserion a sense of satisfaction. However, it was infuriating that he too was sometimes confined within that cage. He was a true dragon, who dared to imprison a genuine dragon. In his fury, he lashed out at the audacious Daenerys. Yet his claws and teeth were evidently insufficiently sharp, and the fool thought he was merely being playful. Viserion harbored a deep-seated loathing for Daenerys, primarily due to her shameless betrayal. He spared her life solely for her servitude, as he vowed that once he matured, she would be the first to perish beneath his dragon fire. He gnawed on the roasted meat she had offered, grinding his teeth in pretense that he was consuming her flesh. Khaleesi. Suddenly, a Dothraki rider galloped forth, exclaiming, "Ahead lies a city." They had traversed the desolate grasslands for an indeterminate time. It seemed that Karassa was bereft of water and sustenance, with daily deaths reported. Yet, this mattered little to Viserion. He had never known hunger. The demise of Khal Drogo was justly deserved. One must be prepared to face death when daring to offend a true dragon. His concern lay with the fact that Karassa could no longer be deemed Karassa, filled as it was with the elderly, the weak, and the ill, almost devoid of warriors. How could such a ragtag army possibly cross the strait and reclaim the Iron Throne? Daenerys was merely a woman, and it was unsurprising that the warriors did not heed her command. The only viable solution was for her to remarry another Khal, or anyone with an army, for that matter. Yet this foolish, contemptible traitor seemed entirely oblivious to this necessity, instead wandering the plains with her entourage of inept followers. Viserion occasionally contemplated the future after retaking Westeros. He had become a dragon. Would he allow Daenerys to ascend to the Iron Throne? However, he resolved to defer such thoughts until all usurpers had been vanquished. After all, he was a dragon now, and he possessed the power to do so. Viserion, the furious dragon, perched upon Daenerys' shoulder, was the first to behold the White City. From afar, the majestic white walls glimmered in the sunlight, symbolizing life and hope. Initially, Viserion was filled with trepidation, fearing that within the city lurked assassins sent by usurpers, silently plotting his demise. As they approached the city gates, the dilapidated details became increasingly apparent, and he grew concerned that at any moment a band of brigands might emerge, easily overwhelming their frail and ailing company. The silvery dragon hissed restlessly, and Daenerys gently nuzzled his neck in a silent attempt to soothe him, inadvertently struck in the face by the delicate frame of his wings. It was not painful, merely a slight irritation. As the group slowly entered the city, Viserion was astonished to find it utterly deserted, with white remnants scattered about, presenting a scene of profound silence. Only then did he feel a slight easing of his anxiety. Daenerys commanded the search for food and water. Yet Viserion scoffed at the meager offerings the servants collected. The true dragon had no need for such feeble sustenance. He craved the raw essence of roasted flesh. For blood and fire were the wellspring of his might. Viserion soared to his utmost limits, surveying the surroundings. Though the place was in disarray and overgrown with weeds, it was, under their current circumstances, a passable refuge. Just as he entertained this thought, he heard someone warn Daenerys, "Khaleesi, this is the domain of ghosts. We cannot linger here." The speaker was a maidservant who had followed Daenerys closely, and this was not her first admonition. The superstitions of the barbaric folk were often irrational. Viserion cast a glance around and noticed many eyes furtively glancing their way, evidently in agreement with her fearful assertion. Absurd. Viserion seethed with indignation, extending his neck to roar at the timid girl. "What nonsense about ghosts? I am a true dragon. Do you think I fear shadows?" The maid seemed oblivious to his fury, her apprehensive gaze still fixated on Daenerys. Just as Viserion contemplated teaching this impudent servant a lesson, ready to unleash his wrath, he was unexpectedly halted by Daenerys' calm declaration, "I fear not the spirits. My dragon is mightier than any ghost." Her composed and resolute tone momentarily stunned Viserion. It was not until the maid retreated that he stretched his wings with satisfaction, thinking to himself, "Well, at least you possess some sense." Illyria and Jiki brought forth some clean sand for Daenerys, attending to her cleansing needs. The Targaryen princess had been thoroughly assimilated by the Dothraki, no longer yearning for the warmth of gentle water, but rather accustomed to using sand for her ablutions, which ignited a profound anger within Viserion. He was set aside by Daenerys, watching as she shed her garments, revealing her form, while the maid used sand to wipe her down, the remnants gently brushed away. Her hair, once a striking symbol of her noble lineage, was now a mere tangled mess, leaving him to ponder how long it would take for her beautiful silver locks to grow back. However, beyond that, it remained a youthful and beautiful body, which Viserion assessed silently, still capable of fetching a handsome price. Daenerys' physique had developed even more splendidly since the last time he beheld her. If she were still a maiden, she could surely attract a more desirable suitor. Yet, the Dothraki might not care about such matters. Viserion deeply regretted having sold her to Khal Drogo. But what could he do now? He was, in truth, at a loss. After the euphoria of transforming into a dragon had faded, he found himself engulfed in confusion. The Targaryen lineage had no male heirs remaining. Would he have to rely on Daenerys? He shuddered at the thought, preferring instead to dream of growing up, envisioning himself, no, a dragon, sweeping across Westeros, reducing usurpers to ashes. Who would care about what came after that? For the time being, he had found a resting place. Rhaegal and Drogon were released from their cage. Frolicking in a corner of the tent, Viserion looked at them, attempting to fly but not soaring high, with a mix of scorn and reassurance, telling himself they were still young and that one day the three of them would indeed blot out the sun, soaring above the clouds. After Daenerys finished bathing, Ser Jorah Mormont requested an audience. Daenerys wrapped herself in a lion's pelt and announced his arrival. Jorah was merely an exiled knight, unworthy of Viserion's direct attention. So he allowed Daenerys to handle the man, while he gloomily scrutinized Drogon and Rhaegal to gauge his own growth. Though he did not deliberately eavesdrop, The conversation between the two was impossible to ignore. Jorah melancholically recounted his romantic history. To satisfy his wife's hedonistic desires, he had forsaken the honor of knighthood and, fearing retribution from House Stark, had fled overseas, only to have that woman abandon him for another. Women, oh women, Viserion mused, despicable and wayward creatures. He felt a pang of sympathy, which oddly instilled in him a sense of superiority. He rarely lifted his head, intending to observe this man's pitiable countenance, only to find that despite his sorrowful visage, Jorah's eyes were fixed intently on Daenerys, gleaming like those of a wolf or tiger. She bears a striking resemblance to you, Daenerys, Jorah Mormont remarked with a sorrowful smile. Bold. Viserion seethed with rage. Channeling every ounce of strength, he spread his wings and lunged at Jorah's face, clawing and biting, leaving the man's astonished expression in disarray. Jorah extended his hand to shield himself, but his hesitation to strike back rendered him powerless against Viserion's frenzied assault. What are you? To dare covet my Daenerys? Great cities! Daenerys exclaimed. Viserion. She reached out to intervene, grasping the frenzied little dragon by the neck and drawing him close, offering Jorah an apologetic smile. The Bear Knight wiped his face vigorously, his eyes widening as he glared at Viserion, who nearly lunged again. Rip apart that old, ugly, and useless face. It was the first time Daenerys had witnessed her dragon become so ferocious. Without further ado, she promptly ordered Jorah to withdraw. Once Viserion reluctantly settled into silence, Daenerys placed him aside and wrapped herself tightly in the lion's pelt, standing in silent contemplation. Viserion was oblivious to her thoughts. Perhaps the gaze of Mormont reminded her of Khal Drogo. To Viserion, he was merely a savage, the purchaser of Daenerys whom he despised deeply, yet to Daenerys, he was her husband, her first man, perhaps even the one she loved dearly. Viserion's thoughts were somewhat nebulous, lacking clarity. On the following dawn, Daenerys summoned her 3 blood riders, commanding them to venture beyond the city in search of other towns in the next course of action. Her tone was resolute, leaving no room for dissent. Viserion had heard her issue commands before, yet he could not help but question whether she was still that timid, docile girl he once knew. Daenerys aimed to safeguard her Khalasar, while Viserion sought only to eat, move, and grow swiftly. Their objectives were mutually exclusive, and he remained indifferent to her decisions, provided she delivered sustenance in due time. However, her intention to confine him once again provoked his ire. During their rest, Daenerys would release the 3 dragons from their cage to frolic freely, but once they resumed their journey, 2 of the dragons would be returned to confinement, for they could not yet keep pace with the caravan. One of the blood riders sent forth to scout, Jorah, returned with 3 oddly dressed strangers. Upon seeing them, Daenerys immediately resolved to head towards Qarth. Viserion struggled in vain and was once more imprisoned. The black dragon, Drogon, perched upon Daenerys' shoulder, while Viserion, after a scuffle, triumphantly stood atop Regal, swaying in the saddle with the cage. He gazed curiously at the 3 newcomers from Qarth, each adorned in peculiar attire. One man had pale skin and blue lips, reminiscent of a sorcerer intoxicated by shade. Another was bald with a prominent hooked nose embellished with jewels, and a woman donned a wooden lacquered mask, obscuring her features. Viserion felt an affinity for the woman, for she spoke in flawless common tongue. After a tumultuous journey, they finally arrived in Qarth, greeted by a cacophony of drums and horns, receiving a grand reception. Viserion recalled having been welcomed in such a manner during his youth, yet such spectacles had become rare in recent years. Qarth was heralded as the greatest city of all time, or so the pale-lipped sorcerer informed Daenerys. Viserion silently added, except for King's Landing. Yet, he had to concede that it could be deemed the most magnificent city of Valyria. The previously visited White City was starkly pale, whereas Qarth was a vibrant contrast, embodying all the colors of the world. Flowers, gold dust, silks, and exquisitely crafted sculptures adorned the walls, while fair-skinned men, women, and children dressed in resplendent attire filled the streets, the splendor of Qarth overwhelming to behold, teeming with life. In that moment, Viserion could think of only one thing. Qarth must be exceedingly wealthy. Both men were exceedingly courteous to Daenerys, and whether it was due to her beauty or the dragon upon her shoulder, Viserion speculated it was likely a combination of both. The bald man, known as Zalozan Wandasos, claimed to be one of the 12 magnates of Kays, and although he was indeed a wealthy merchant, Viserion could not help but feel that he was unworthy of Daenerys, being merely 1/12 of the whole. Fortunately, Daenerys remained vigilant, not allowing herself to be swayed by trifling favors, which somewhat relieved Viserion. Ultimately, Daenerys accepted the invitation to reside in Zalozan Wandasos's opulent mansion, which even left Viserion astonished by its grandeur. The expansive rooms, countless slaves, vibrant gardens, and the extravagantly large marble bath left him breathless. Yet, he retained a fragment of rationality, aware that he could not be bought by such superficialities. As was her custom, Daenerys instructed her bloodsworn and Yura to scout the surroundings, while Viserion and Rhaegar were released from their confines to survey their new abode. After days of acclimatization, Viserion firmly believed he had tamed Rhaegar. The bronze-scaled dragon no longer contested space with him and only partook of the food Daenerys provided after Viserion had eaten his fill. Recognizing Rhaegar's understanding of his authority, he chose not to quarrel, even generously allowing the dragon to walk alongside him. Once all the men departed, Daenerys, attended by her maidens, entered the marble bath to cleanse herself. Viserion, alongside Rhaegar, stood at the edge of the pool, washing his own body. While Rhaegar seemed reluctant to enter the water, but was compelled to bow his head under Viserion's insistence. Drogon, not far away, flapped his wings upon the ground, the dust and grime on him dizzying, yet his gaze bore an air of disdain. Viserion yearned to teach Drogon a lesson alongside Rhaegar, but Daenerys, giggling at the tickling bites of the small fish in the water, unexpectedly gathered the two small dragons into her embrace. Her laughter was sweet and enchanting, and at 15, her skin radiated youth and delicacy. Viserion found himself captivated, pondering that according to Targaryen tradition, this woman could have been his wife. Yet, he quickly reminded himself that she was no longer deserving of such a title. I am the true dragon, while she is merely a rebel. He wondered if the Red Keep possessed gardens and pools akin to this. Daenerys glanced aside, murmuring to herself, surely there are. 100 times better. Viserion could not suppress a roar, biting down gently on the soft skin of the girl. There must be, Daenerys replied softly yet resolutely, seemingly unfazed by his bite. As she sank into her memories, recalling how Viserys often proclaimed that the Seven Kingdoms were the most beautiful places in the world, Viserion's heart quivered, and he involuntarily released his grip, looking into Daenerys' eyes. Though she cradled two dragons, her gaze reflected only him, as if through the white dragon. She glimpsed the shadow of an old acquaintance, nostalgic and sorrowful. Daenerys fell into silence, and Viserion mirrored her quietude. The air filled only with the sound of Rhaegar and Drogon flapping their wings. Viserion pondered that Daenerys must be regretting her choices, certainly recalling his kindness, and growing increasingly remorseful. If her contrition was sincere, should he forgive her? Daenerys' next words completely extinguished his thoughts. Viserys is a fool, the girl suddenly sighed. Viserys is a fool. The precious gifts. Daenerys Targaryen possessed 3 dragons, which were akin to her children. Like human offspring, those raised in similar environments exhibited varying traits. Drogon, resembling her sun and stars, was the most valiant and robust, while Viserion bore a resemblance to her brother Viserys, being irritable and capricious. At that moment, Viserion, who had been frolicking with his brother Rhaegal, suddenly erupted in fury, his pale yellow scales shimmering as they splashed in the pool. For reasons unknown, Viserion lashed out, his wings striking the water, accompanied by a low growl as he raised his head and exhaled a plume of black smoke. Daenerys quickly turned her head to evade the onslaught, inadvertently submerging both young dragons in the water. Instantly, bubbles rose to the surface of the crystalline water. Hastily, Daenerys lifted the 2 bewildered creatures from the water, abandoning her bath as she stepped away from the pool, calling out, Illy, Cheeky. The 2 handmaidens rushed in, and Daenerys snatched a towel from their hands, carefully drying the bodies of the young dragons. Only when they vigorously shook their heads, flapping their wings or emitting clouds of black smoke, did Daenerys finally exhale in relief. The bond of dragon and fire was sacred. She feared that this nascent flame might be extinguished by the water. With her body bare, Daenerys allowed the 2 handmaidens to dry her off and wrap her in a robe. Viserion lunged at her again, his not-so-sharp claws digging into her shoulder with such force that it nearly drew blood. Yet, she merely lifted the young dragon and placed him on her other shoulder, covered by her attire. While in the pool, she had been transported from this opulent garden to Westeros, contemplating the usurper Baratheon and his powerful, cunning henchmen, who were wealthy beyond measure while she possessed nothing. How could she reclaim what was rightfully hers? Viserys often proclaimed that the people of the realm would rise for the true dragon. He believed that as long as he was alive and returned, he would naturally command a formidable army and all else he desired. But she was not Viserys. She would not entertain such foolish notions. Were it not for Viserion, she might have succumbed to self-doubt and despair. The young dragon roared at her, as if to assert his existence. She was not devoid of power. She had dragons. The dragons were her strength. She was the mother of dragons. Daenerys mused that Viserion must have sensed her emotions, for he was bestowing upon her courage. Regal, having been splashed with water, appeared dazed, incessantly flapping his wings yet unable to take flight. Drogon observed with a cold, indifferent gaze, elegantly gliding close to the ground. Resembling mockery, Daenerys had awakened the sleeping rage of the dragons. Viserion was resolute in his intent to exact retribution. Yet Daenerys was no longer the helpless little girl he could manipulate, nor was he the stronger man he once was. His anger and desire for punishment did not elicit evasion and tears, but rather a soothing composure, which only fueled Viserion's ire further. However, his fury found no outlet and remained pent up within him, prompting him to provoke the trembling Regal nearby. Encouraged by his words, Regal finally ceased his neurotic flapping of wings and leapt forcefully onto Daenerys' lap. As dusk approached, Daenerys began to prepare dinner for the three little dragons. The brazier crackled with charcoal, and the bloodied chunks of meat were seared by the flickering flames, releasing an enticing aroma that wafted through the air. Viserion, inhaling deeply, speculated that it was snake meat. Across the fire pit, Drogon and he faced one another, both eyeing the same piece of meat with ravenous intent. Returning from the docks were Ser Jorah and Missandei, and amidst their arrival, a maid entered, accompanied by a stranger. Viserion's attention was drawn to the maid, and in that moment of distraction, Drogon seized the opportunity. The black dragon devoured the roasted meat in one swift motion, not sparing a glance at Viserion. Viserion reassured himself. After all, they were all his dragons. The more they ate, the quicker they would grow, ultimately serving as his strength. Daenerys invited them to join, and soon the rugged knight and his companion arrived. Viserion lay on the cushion, squinting at the unfamiliar newcomer, whose skin was as dark as jet, suggesting origins from the Summer Isles, yet he spoke fluent Valyrian. Jorah had been dispatched to the docks to gather news from the Seven Kingdoms and scout for vessels of potential use. This man from the Summer Isles had spent years sailing the seas and possessed a wealth of distant knowledge. After exchanging pleasantries, he finally revealed his purpose. "Your Majesty, I bring you a special gift." The visitor spoke with deference, though Daenerys hardly considered herself a queen. "A gift?" Daenerys inquired, her interest piqued. Viserion perked up, wondering if it was a ship capable of traversing the narrow sea. "A piece of good news," the man replied with a smile, "Mother of Dragons. Allow me to inform you that Robert Baratheon is dead." "Better than a ship." Viserion's massive form trembled, scarcely able to believe his ears. He thought he might have shed tears as the surroundings blurred before him, but soon realized it was not mist, but flames. His excitement had induced a mirage. "He is dead?" The girl's voice queried in disbelief. "Are you certain? The usurper is truly dead?" Viserion fixated intently on the man's lips as the stark white teeth stood out against his dark visage. The man's words seemed to echo from afar, yet rang with clarity. "The people of Old Town all say the same. In Dorne, in Lys. In every port where we have docked, the news is consistent." Good, good, good. Beyond that, Viserion struggled to articulate further, uncertain how to express his emotions. Drogon lay on Daenerys' lap, hissing and exhaling a plume of white smoke, while the copper-hued Regal flapped his wings, stirring the air. The usurper was finally dead. He sought the lives of the siblings, but succumbed before they could. "How did he die? How did he die?" Daenerys asked on his behalf. "He was gored to death by a monstrous wild boar while hunting in the Kingswood. At least, that is what I heard in Old Town. Some say it was betrayal by the queen, or by his brother, or his hand, Lord Stark. All legends share a common thread. King Robert is indeed deceased, interred within his grave. Furthermore, with King Joffrey now ascending the throne, the reins of governance lie firmly within the grasp of House Lannister. Robert's two brothers have fled from King's Landing, with rumors swirling that they aspire to claim the crown. The hand of the king has lost his influence. And Duke Stark, Robert's dearest friend, has been apprehended on charges of treason. Joffrey, Lannister, Stark, without Robert Baratheon, yet faced with other adversaries. One can only hope they continue to wreak havoc upon one another. Eddard Stark, a traitor? Ser Jorah scoffs at the notion. Only the White Walkers would believe such a tale. Even with the arrival of eternal summer, this man would not tarnish his precious honor. Honor? These traitors dare to utter the word honor. Viserion exhaled a plume of black smoke, remaining motionless. Though discontent, he yearned to continue eavesdropping on their discourse. What honor could he possess? Indeed, Daenerys echoes this sentiment. He has betrayed the true king, as have those of House Lannister. My brother Viserys is deceased. He was the rightful king, she confided to the people of the Summer Islands. My husband, called Drogo, crowned him with molten gold. Viserys was the true king. Upon hearing this, Viserion ought to have swelled with pride and agreement, yet he remained voiceless. Daenerys engaged in negotiations with the captain from the Summer Islands, while Viserion could only observe in silence. His ship would not return to Westeros in the immediate future, and though Daenerys appeared somewhat disappointed by this, she still bestowed upon him her blessings, expressing gratitude for the precious gift he had brought. Indeed, it is a precious gift, Viserion mused, and I have received ample recompense. Great Queen, Daenerys, somewhat perplexed, inquired, recompense? The ebony-skinned man's eyes sparkled with light. I have seen the dragon. Daenerys laughed, radiant as the morning sun, proud and graceful, embodying the essence of a true queen. I hope that one day, you may witness even more. When I ascend my father's throne, come to King's Landing to see me, and you shall receive a generous reward. Viserion has recently been quite placid, ever since he learned of the usurper's demise. His heart has floated as if adrift in the clouds, perpetually imbued with a sense of unreality. It is said that Westeros is now plagued by numerous so-called kings, engulfed in ceaseless warfare, and should he return bearing the banner of the true dragon, he would surely garner support. Alas, he is no longer Viserys Targaryen. Daenerys seems to share this sentiment. Following her declaration of ambition to reclaim the Iron Throne, she has become increasingly proactive in her dealings with the Qartheen, seeking their backing. Viserion watched with a discerning eye, aware that her pleas would yield no fruitful outcome. Viserys had once visited Pentos, Marine, Bravos, and all the free trade cities, beseeching governors, lords, and merchant magnates for aid, at times resorting to flattery to secure sustenance. Yet all he received were intoxicating wines, exquisite gifts, and hollow promises. He understood that he was dubbed the Beggar King, yet what could he possibly say in response? He possessed nothing and could only await the charity of others without offering anything in return, who would be inclined to bestow upon him their generosity. To garner assistance from others, one must possess a value that resonates with them, a truth well understood by Viserion. Zeros, in his opulence, provided Daenerys with gold and grandeur, and with his introduction, gifts flowed in like an unending stream. Viserion observed Zeros's smiling visage, anticipating the moment he would propose his terms. Marry me, my queen. I am consumed by thoughts of your beauty, losing sleep each night. As expected, Zeros did indeed propose to Daenerys. Had this been mere days prior, Viserion would have inwardly scoffed, "You think you are worthy?" and lunged at him to tear him apart. Yet, at a certain moment, he realized that Daenerys was no longer the weak and ignorant girl he once knew. She would undoubtedly refuse. And refuse she did, graciously acknowledging his gifts but declaring, "What I truly require are warships and soldiers." Thus, the following day, Zeros presented her with an army, 1,000 knights, each clad in resplendent armor. The armor was crafted from gold and silver, while the knights themselves were made of emeralds, rubies, agate, tourmaline, amber, opal, and amethyst, each one the size of Viserion's claw. Daenerys casually placed a portion of this 1,000-man army upon the table. Viserion fantasized that they might become his future adversaries, and, seizing the opportunity in Daenerys' absence, he leaned over the edge of the table and blew most of them down in one breath. With a flap of his wings, the gem-crafted knights tumbled to the ground, shattering upon impact. Drogon and Rhaegal exhibited great interest in the shimmering stones, seemingly eager to join in his game of war. Kaith hurriedly collected the fortunate knights that had survived the ordeal, while the others could only sift through the remnants scattered on the floor. Later, she reported to Daenerys, who simply smiled at the news. Daenerys now ventured out daily, engaging with a myriad of noble figures, returning to her abode utterly exhausted. Viserion speculated that by destroying these fragile mock knights, he might have inadvertently aligned with her sentiments. Surely, as she listened to the insincere exchanges of those around her, she wished to obliterate them as well. The royal lineage of Qarth descends from the ancient kings and queens of Qarth, commanding both the citizen guard and an opulent fleet. Daenerys yearned for that fleet, even if only a fraction of it. In her pursuit of an audience with the royals, she adhered to intricate and peculiar rites, offering traditional sacrifices at the Temple of Memory, presenting tributes to the registrar, and gifting traditional persimmons to the gatekeeper, ultimately receiving the customary blue silk slippers that summoned her to the Hall of 1,000 Seats. Whenever she ventured out, she would perch one dragon upon her shoulder while the other two remained at her residence, under the vigilant watch of her blood riders. On the day of her summons, Viserion was meant to accompany her. However, he had foreseen the outcome and, in a fit of temper, refused to remain still on the queen's shoulder. Daenerys, in exasperation, was compelled to substitute Rhaegal instead. Daenerys' hair had grown long, and she adorned herself in flowing green silk attire, exposing one shoulder. With silver sandals adorning her feet and a belt of black and white pearls cinching her waist, appearing resplendent. Yet, no matter how beautifully she was arrayed, it mattered not. Viserion willingly flew into the cage for the first time. He could not bear to witness Daenerys suffer the same indignities he had endured in his youth. Yet, his only option was to look away. As evening fell, Daenerys returned, her youthful visage marked by fatigue, though devoid of significant gloom. Indeed, she harbored little expectation, Viserion mused. And he secretly felt relieved. Drogon emitted a hissing cry, seemingly mocking his day's unease. Viserion chose to ignore it, taking flight to displace Rhaegal from Daenerys' shoulder, boldly claiming the highest perch. Daenerys turned her head, and Viserion instinctively retracted his wings, brushing gently against her cheek. The girl murmured, "The comet has led me to Qarth for a reason." Viserion detected the frailty and fear in her words. She was his little sister, the girl he knew so well. Yet in the next moment, she transformed into a queen. With unwavering resolve, she declared, "I wish to meet Pyat Pree." Pyat Pree was a warlock who drank the waters of shadows, regarded by the Dothraki and Ser Jorah as nothing more than a purveyor of lies. Yet Daenerys resolved to accept his invitation to the House of the Undying. This abode bore the ominous moniker of the House of Dust, a name that hardly inspired confidence. And all urged Daenerys to abandon her quest. Viserion, too, deemed such warlocks untrustworthy, yet he believed he could comprehend her intentions. Daenerys Targaryen appeared unyielding. Though she was indeed out of options, the Red Comet had guided her to Qarth, where she hoped to acquire what she desperately needed. But Qarth harbored none of her allies. Viserion understood this sentiment well. The nobility regarded her as a mere jester, the 13 craved her dragons, and the Spice Guild and the Brotherhood of the Green Council were locked in rivalry, each desiring something not far removed from the other. If she were to obtain anything in Qarth, it could only be from the perilous and enigmatic warlock. This was her final chance, however unreliable it might be. It was said that the Undying possessed supreme wisdom, and Viserion hoped that Daenerys would indeed find the revelation she sought. The orange flames roasted the bloodied meat, and Viserion had begun to discern the source of the food by its scent. Today's meal came from a peculiar lizard native to Qarth. Daenerys sliced the roasted meat into small pieces and placed them before her 3 dragons. As Viserion ate, he observed, detecting a hint of tension beneath her calm exterior. After all, the forces at play were unknown. It was impossible to be entirely untroubled. Yet, among all forms of magic, the mightiest was that of dragons. And the most formidable was Dragonfire. With 3 dragons beside her, what was there to fear? Viserion threw back his head and roared, soaring into the air and alighting next to Daenerys. She offered a faint smile, yet rose to say, "Drogon, it is time for us to go." The 3 Bloodriders and Ser Jorah Mormont accompanied her as they departed. Zero had prepared a litter, its white drapes billowing gracefully in the wind, creating an elegant tableau, while Zero reclined in the litter, resembling a mountain of opulent flesh. Vermithrax gazed at Daenerys as she mounted the carriage, seated opposite Zero, and felt an inherent discord in the tableau. Drogon rested his head on Daenerys' shoulder, turning back to provoke him with a shrill cry. Vermithrax nearly lunged to bite him, but was restrained by Illy. The maid reassured him, "Do not fret, Khaleesi shall return shortly." Whether this was directed at him or not remained unclear. Vermithrax scorned the need to explain himself, retracting his wings and tucking in his neck. Frankly, Drogon was fiercer than he and Rhaegal, and he hoped the dragon would prove useful. Upon returning indoors, Rhaegal was still frolicking by the brazier, his exhalations distorting the flames into fantastical shapes. Illy and Missandei removed the brazier, leaving the 2 young dragons inside, where Vermithrax and Rhaegal immediately engaged in a spirited melee. Perhaps it was the nature of dragons to be combative. Recently, Vermithrax had grown a bit, and upon realizing this, he eagerly upended Rhaegal with his wings, prompting the green dragon to respond as he desired. Henceforth, they frequently clashed, utilizing claws, teeth, wings, tails, and every part of their bodies as weapons. Vermithrax gradually mastered the art of combat through these encounters. However, Rhaegal maintained that they were not engaged in fierce rivalry, but rather in playful sport. Regardless of the outcome, they would joyfully shake their heads after each bout, relishing additional morsels during mealtime. Even in defeat, Rhaegal remained blissful. What a foolish creature. Yet today, Vermithrax felt a lingering unease. Rhaegal, too, exhibited signs of restlessness, his voice tinged with agitation, his strikes particularly unrelenting, nearly scratching Vermithrax's neck. Vermithrax circled behind Rhaegal and delivered a strike to his tail, causing the green dragon to lose his balance and teeter precariously. As the round concluded, the 2 young dragons landed on the ground. Rhaegal appeared unusually lethargic, lowering his head and emitting a soft whine. While Vermithrax was catching his breath, he observed Regal's demeanor and suddenly realized that, by age, both he and Drogon were still mere hatchlings, which struck him as profoundly peculiar. Missandei parted the curtain and, upon seeing the two dragons sprawled on the ground, turned and exited. Once Vermithrax had sufficiently recuperated, he flicked his tail at Regal, signaling for another round. Watching Regal unfurl his wings, he mused whether Rhaegar had similarly sought sparring partners during his sword training in times past. The white and green dragons clashed once more, tearing and soaring higher. But just as they approached the ceiling, Vermithrax was suddenly seized by an inexplicable sense of foreboding. The white dragon halted its movements. Simultaneously, Regal felt an inexplicable call emanating from the depths of his soul, leaving him suspended in the air, unsure of how to proceed. It was Daenerys. Vermithrax regained his senses first, releasing Regal's wing and plunging toward the door with fervor. Regal quickly followed suit. At the threshold, the startled exclamations of Illy and Missandei whisked past him like the wind. They restrained Regal, yet Vermithrax soared ahead unimpeded. Vermithrax! Regal exclaimed, straining against Illy's grasp. But Vermithrax had no inclination to assist him. He could sense that in that direction, Daenerys and Drogon awaited. Viserion soared over the astonished crowd, gliding past street vendors and magnificent rooftops, yet weariness weighed heavily upon him. How high had he ascended? How far had he traveled? How could he not endure? The white dragon emitted a reluctant roar, a cry of defiance. Ah, the perilous triumph. Before him stood a grayish-white structure, resembling a crumbling edifice, from which amber light flickered, and dense smoke billowed from the rough crevices. By the time Viserion finally arrived, battered yet determined, Daenerys had emerged unscathed. Though her hair was disheveled and her body smeared with black soot, she was, thankfully, unharmed. Viserion folded his wings, landing feebly not far away. His gaze fixed upon the aged, unseemly knight who clutched Daenerys in his arms, gritting his teeth in a mix of fury and helplessness. Drogon sensed Viserion's presence from afar, leaving Daenerys' side to soar majestically down, extending his neck to nuzzle against him, which caused Viserion's bristles to soften slightly. Daenerys, following Drogon's lead, caught sight of Viserion and exclaimed in astonishment, "Viserion? How did you come to be here? At a distance neither too close nor too far." Viserion suddenly hissed fiercely at her, causing Daenerys to pause as a dagger clattered to the ground. The male sorcerer, wielding the knife, intended to assassinate Daenerys, but fortunately, the ever-watchful Jorah reacted swiftly. With a crack of his whip, he struck the pale face of the assailant, drawing blood. The frail man collapsed, clutching his face, emitting a dying wail accompanied by a string of venomous curses. Viserion observed the gray structure ignite, belatedly realizing that this was the Hall of Immortality. Daenerys and Drogon had set the hall ablaze. Viserion found himself at a loss, unsure whether to weep or rejoice, while Drogon appeared exceedingly pleased. Daenerys pushed past the intrusive Jorah, rushing to Viserion, kneeling down to carefully lift him. She now required both hands to cradle the diminutive dragon. "What transpired? How did you end up here?" she inquired. "Fool, do you truly expect a dragon to articulate answers?" Viserion weakly flapped his wings, curling his slender neck to bury his head beneath his body. Drogon let out a hissing call, landing gracefully on Daenerys' shoulder, casually tilting his head to regard Viserion with one eye. Viserion was surprised to comprehend his meaning. "You really managed to find your way here. Not bad at all." He buried his head even deeper. Daenerys gazed at the kitten-sized white dragon, her mind swirling with unspoken thoughts, and with a voice as soft as honey, she said, "Viserion. Be grateful. I exerted considerable effort to reach here." Drogon replied, "All right, I suppose I did arrive a tad late. My child, who is your child?" If Viserion had the strength, he would have insisted on clarifying their hierarchy, but he was far too exhausted. The moment he laid eyes on Dany, he found himself utterly drained of strength. Despite feeling utterly exhausted, as if on the brink of death, his heartbeat steadied, slow yet powerful. Jorah furrowed his brow and grasped Dany's arm, urging, "We must leave this place swiftly." Dany cast a fleeting glance at the immortal hall shrouded in black smoke before swiftly stepping onto the billowing platform. Xaro immediately commanded, "Let us depart." Dany's blood-sworn guards remained at her side, yet their return journey was considerably swifter than their arrival. The astute merchant, observing the two small dragons perched upon Dany, lamented with a heavy heart, "You have wrought destruction upon the immortal hall. The warlock shall not let this transgression go unpunished. Even the mere thought of your pure skin tainting against that decayed structure fills me with dread. Pray tell, what compelled you to act thus?" Dany deftly sidestepped the inquiry, retorting, "Did you not assert that the warlock possesses no true power, merely boasting of past glories? What is there to fear from such a man? Zaro, still beset by worry, countered, though you speak so, I cannot rest easy while even a hint of danger lingers. Your safety is of paramount importance to me. Your actions have rendered every hue in my world pale and terrifying. What lies within the immortal hall that incited such wrath in you? Zaro spoke with eloquence, yet Viserion, too, was intrigued. Within the tongues of the Qyrls, the immortal hall was both a den of demons and a sanctuary of wisdom. He yearned to learn what Dany had witnessed within, yet deemed it unnecessary to share this curiosity with Zaro. As fate would have it, the platform reached its destination, and Dany, citing the need for rest, declined Zaro's continued company. With tear-filled eyes, Zaro bid farewell, saying, "My heart is with you." Viserion observed the hefty man weeping like a child and expelled a puff of smoke in disgust. Upon entering her quarters, Dany was met with the frantic apologies of Eily and Khaleesi. They had spotted the white dragon resting upon her shoulder. Dany was flanked by the black and white dragons. While Viserion did not exude the same vigor as Drogon, he appeared unharmed. Conversely, Dany looked the most disheveled. Eily lamented, "It was our failure to care for Viserion. He flew away on his own. I only managed to restrain Rhaegar." Kiki inquired, "Khaleesi, what transpired?" Dany held no blame. She gently stroked the small dragon on her shoulder and smiled softly. No one can easily restrain a true dragon. Dany instructed 2 maidservants to prepare dinner before retreating to her chamber with Yora. Viserion suddenly realized that whenever Dany faced adversity, she invariably sought counsel from Yora. As queen, the only individual able to provide her with advice was a former knight who had strayed from honor, a rather ominous sign. Fortunately, Yora proved to be a reasonable man. Aside from his infatuation with his queen, he harbored no ulterior motives in other matters, at least for the time being. As Viserion found himself home, he rolled off Dany's shoulder, landing softly upon the plush carpet to rest. Rhaegar had been confined by the maidservants in a cage, incessantly calling out all day, only now settling into silence. Upon entering, Daenerys immediately released him from his cage, and Rhaegar nuzzled against her hand with a look of grievance. Yora spoke with far more candor than Zaro, "Your Majesty, what lies within the hall of the immortal?" Viserion lay prostrate on the ground, appearing as though he were asleep, yet he attentively pricked his ears to listen. Daenerys hesitated, revealing, "I have witnessed some terrifying visions and heard prophecies. I saw 4 diminutive figures cruelly mistreating a beautiful woman, a corpse standing at the bow of a ship, a blue rose, and a blood-soaked feast." She furrowed her brow, seemingly straining to recall. "The immortals granted me a prophecy. They referred to me as the 3rd child." Viserion felt a strange sensation creeping up his tail, causing him to shudder involuntarily. Yora solemnly remarked, "Did Zaro not inform you that the blue-lipped ones utter only falsehoods? Their words need not weigh upon your heart." "Perhaps," Daenerys exhaled, "they wish to drag me into darkness with their desiccated hands, yet Drogon incinerated them to ashes." Viserion looked up in astonishment at Drogon, who had already begun to breathe fire. "They seek to siphon your life," Yora asserted. "Regardless, the so-called immortals surely harbor malicious intent." "Drogon's flames are commendable," Viserion acknowledged with a glance at him, and Drogon responded with his usual hissing cries. Though the Hall of the Immortal was not an agreeable place, it was nonetheless regarded as a sanctuary by the warlocks. Zaro's words bore some truth. Those blue-lipped beings would not relent. A few days later, one of the 12 great masters, Zaro Zonder Sothos, earnestly came to pay his respects to the queen. Bearing unsettling news, "The warlock Piet Pri has summoned the surviving sorcerers, plotting against you." Daenerys could not suppress a chuckle. "Did you not tell me that the warlocks are as laughable as those frail old soldiers, merely boasting of past glories, oblivious to the fact that strength and skill have long since abandoned them?" Viserion was far less optimistic. He sensed the enigmatic nature of magic. Even if the warlocks wielded but a fraction of it, it was sufficient to instill fear. Zaro enumerated numerous mysterious occurrences in Qarth that had transpired recently, attempting to illustrate that the present differed from the past, as the warlock's power seemed to have returned. He advised Daenerys to depart Qarth at once, while still clinging to his daydream. "You witnessed dark visions in the Hall of Dust, yet Zaro's dreams are filled with light. I dream of you joyfully lying in bed, cradling our child against your breast. It is not too late. Come sail with me to the Jade Sea and make this dream a reality. Grant me a son, my beloved star of heaven." This marked yet another occasion on which he had proposed to Daenerys. Viserion had overheard them discussing Qarth's marriage customs, where the bride and groom could request a gift from one another during the ceremony, a request that could not be refused. Thus, each time he heard the impassioned plea, "Marry me, my queen." It was automatically translated in his mind to give me a dragon, you wretched woman. Before Daenerys could respond, Viserion lazily lifted his head and exhaled a plume of fire. In the vivid orange flames, a golden hue flowed, exuding an air of opulence and beauty. Yet in an instant, it ignited Zero's garments. Daenerys, having anticipated this, swiftly seized a copper basin filled with water and doused Zero. Despite suffering minor burns, the man emerged largely unscathed, though his drenched clothes clung to his rounded form, leaving him wide-eyed and motionless. Whether in shock or rage, it was unclear. Dany merely smiled and remarked, "It seems you have failed to win the favor of my children." Viserion's slit pupils immediately fixed upon the silver-haired woman, pondering her regal demeanor. Zero, true to his Carthian nature, feigned a heartbroken pose, covering his face in anguish, and lamented, "Then you may leave. Alas, please do depart." His bravado was palpable. Yet once Zero had exited, Dany's shoulders sagged under the weight of her burdens, and she exhaled a deep sigh. Viserion leaped up, playfully disheveling her hair, acutely aware that their departure was imminent. However, he was oblivious to their next destination. Daenerys did not divulge her plans, and he suspected she herself was uncertain. Their lives thus far had been a ceaseless flight, and the duration of this escape remained unknown. Soon, he thought, exhaling a plume of fire, soon. To avoid traversing the blood-soaked wasteland once more, they needed a ship to leave Qarth. Zero, of course, would not provide this without recompense. He demanded a dragon in exchange. Following their previous encounter, this affluent patron had severed ties with Dany, demanding she vacate his abode and return all gifts. The queen found herself utterly isolated. On that day, Daenerys resolved to venture to the docks herself in search of a vessel. Viserion knew that the docks were a tumultuous place, a mix of smoke and chaos. Hardly suitable for royalty, yet he could not deter her. The queen busied herself with her appearance, flashing a smile at her 3 young dragons, instructing them to stay put. Viserion observed as she donned faded silk trousers and grass-woven sandals, a small curved dagger hanging from her belt. This was the attire of the Dothraki. Njiki had even styled her hair in Dothraki braids, adorned with a silver bell at the end. According to Dothraki custom, a silver bell signified a victory. "I have not won a battle," she remarked softly, the bell chiming lightly. Njiki's tone brimmed with uncontainable admiration. "You burn the sorcerers in the House of Dust, casting their souls back to hell." Daenerys envisioned herself as the Khaleesi of the vast plains, and those around her revered her for it. Yet, she was ultimately Daenerys Targaryen. How could she forget her lineage? A surge of fury ignited within Viserion, a fire that should have been apocalyptic, yet it remained unkind-led. He gazed upon Daenerys's exquisite visage and tattered attire, suddenly realizing that he was the one who had brought her to this state. But was this version of Daenerys still a Targaryen? Little did Daenerys know that Viserion, as a young dragon, grappled with such profound confusion within his heart. She donned her customary attire, mounted her beloved steed, and, accompanied by the Blood Riders and Yora, cheerfully made her way to the docks. Viserion, who had never favored complex contemplation, immediately set aside his worries upon Daenerys's departure, resuming his playful antics with Rhaegal and Drogon. The trio of young dragons, having acquired the ability to breathe fire, became exponentially more destructive, yet in Daenerys's absence, none dared to rein them in. The hall was lined with copper basins and earthenware jars filled with water, while 2 maidens stood at the ready, vigilant for any signs of trouble. As evening approached, Daenerys returned, radiant with energy. She brought back with her 2 strangers, the white-bearded Astapor and the burly Varys. Before Viserion could scrutinize the newcomers closely, the queen proclaimed to the assembly, "Prepare yourselves, we depart in 3 days." "Where are we going, Khaleesi?" one of the maidens inquired. "Pintos," Daenerys replied. "My friend Illyrio has arranged for us 3 ships, Balerion, Maraudis, and Vhagar." Balerion, Maraudis, and Vhagar. The Dothraki may not comprehend the significance of these names, but Viserion understood all too well. They were the names of the 3-headed dragon belonging to the conqueror Aegon and his 2 sisters. Viserion felt a surge of fiery blood coursing through him. Whether it was Rhaegal and Drogon who grasped Daenerys' words, or if Viserion's fervor influenced them, the 2 young dragons stirred restlessly. Daenerys smiled at the sight of the 3 dragons unfurling their wings simultaneously, her eyes sparkling with an indescribable brilliance. Viserion soared into the air, wishing to alight on her shoulder as before, but Daenerys deftly evaded him. "No," she gently remarked, "you have grown." It was the first time since his rebirth from the flames that Viserion realized her shoulder was not as broad as he had once thought. The long voyage the Dothraki referred to the ocean as poisoned waters, and the self-proclaimed brave and strong young bloodriders trembled before the boundless expanse of this toxic sea, their efforts to conceal their inner turmoil and aversion proving futile. Viserion finally seized the opportunity to mock them heartily, yet his laughter went unheard. The vast ocean was no stranger to Viserion. He and Daenerys had traversed the narrow sea countless times, journeying from one free trade city to another, ever fearful that lingering too long in one place would attract an assassin seeking their lives. The ocean, immense and capricious, often left him disoriented in a realm where sky and water merged, yet seasoned sailors skillfully guided them to safety. Regardless of the ocean's vastness, they were constrained to follow established routes. Such was the fate of all. He recalled Daenerys' childhood desire to be the ship that deviated from its course. Watching the fishermen stow their nets, she whimsically declared her ambition to become a sailor. Though such a path was hardly befitting a Targaryen, in hindsight, perhaps Daenerys was indeed destined for an encounter with the sea. She was born of storms, and he still remembered Dragonstone on the day of her birth, engulfed in tempestuous gales, and her fearless cries amid the howling winds. He remembered everything, yet he deliberately refrained from dwelling on it. For that day not only marked Daenerys' birthday, but also the anniversary of his mother's passing. He harbored resentment towards Daenerys for his mother's demise, blaming her for being born too late. Yet, deep within his heart, he had once chastised her for being a Targaryen. Such feelings were fleeting, scarcely surfacing before vanishing entirely. Nevertheless, he had pondered the notion that had this little girl not been a Targaryen, she might have led a vastly different life. However, such thoughts had ultimately dissipated. Daenerys was destined to be a Targaryen, and she was undoubtedly worthy of that title. The voyage across the sea was long and monotonous. Initially, the crew held a profound reverence for the dragons aboard, as was fitting. Yet, Captain Grolio shockingly proposed to confine them in a cage, justifying his decision by citing a minor fire incident caused by the 3 young dragons. Why should he be punished for Drogon's mischief? Viserion vehemently resisted, while Rhaegal cowered in the cage, plaintively whining. Daenerys' heart softened, prompting her to declare, "Let them be free, I shall teach them." She positioned the 3 dragons before her, crouched down, and earnestly instructed, "You must not breathe fire indiscriminately on the ship, it could catch ablaze. Without the ship, we would drown. Do you understand?" Viserion found her pedagogical demeanor amusing, yet he nodded earnestly. However, he doubted whether the other 2 comprehended her words. Drogon seemed aware that he had caused trouble, having concealed himself as the flames erupted. Now, called down from the mast by Daenerys, he likely feared to repeat his mistake. Yet Rhaegal appeared utterly oblivious, eagerly attempting to nuzzle against her as she crouched down. Dragons lacked a structured language. They could only convey emotions and simple cues to one another, unable to express complex thoughts. Thus, Viserion let out a low growl at the clueless Rhaegal, urging him to mind his behavior and bow his head. After a moment's contemplation, Daenerys added, "This means dragon fire in High Valyrian." Viserion remained perplexed. However, Drogon, perhaps spurred by some unseen impulse, unleashed a burst of flames before Daenerys, a stunning amalgamation of crimson, orange, and black, more exquisite than any jewel. Viserion, watching the beautiful conflagration, thought with a hint of schadenfreude, "This time, you are finished." Yet to his surprise, Daenerys appeared not the slightest bit angered. In fact, she looked exceedingly pleased. "Well done, Drogon," she exclaimed, rewarding him with a piece of cooked meat. Drogon showed no signs of guilt as he devoured the meat, leaving Viserion utterly bewildered by the unfolding drama. Daenerys patiently reiterated, "You must not breathe fire on the ship, except when I permit it. Do you understand?" Rhaegal did not grasp the message, but he was quick to observe that Drogon received meat after showcasing his fire-breathing skills. Consequently, when Daenerys next spoke, Rhaegal wasted no time in displaying his own remarkable fire-breathing ability, earning a piece of meat as a reward. Again, Daenerys instructed. Viserion remained indifferent, while Drogon enthusiastically complied. Of course, receiving yet another piece of meat, Dany could hardly conceal her disappointment as she gazed at him, yet she reassured herself, "It is all right, take your time." Viserion, of course, understood her intentions, yet the notion of training a dragon as one would a dog felt profoundly degrading to him. If Drogon and Rhaegal were willing to assume such a role, so be it. He, however, would never submit. He was acutely aware of when to unleash his fiery breath and when to refrain, requiring no commands from anyone. The ship comprised predominantly of wooden materials, which were highly flammable, and Viserion had no desire to destroy their vessel. Thus he refrained from igniting flames indiscriminately aboard. His yearning was to practice producing more refined and potent fire, necessitating that he seek the open sea for his endeavors. Initially, The tumultuous waves rendered him dizzy, but gradually. Viserion began to relish this sensation. The seawater evaporated under his dragon fire, and the dense mist enveloped him, the scalding vapor instilling a comforting sensation within him. At times, a silvery flying fish would leap from the water, and with precise timing, Viserion would unleash a burst of flame, allowing him to savor a delectable feast. He no longer required Daenerys' provisions. However, Drogon progressed more swiftly than he did. It was as if he had never feared losing his way, soaring higher and farther with each passing day, at times eluding even Viserion's gaze. Rhaegal, on the other hand, preferred to remain within the confines of the cabin. Viserion once overheard the crew discussing how, since the ship had been renamed the Balerion, the number of rats aboard had noticeably diminished, attributing this to the presence of the three dragons. Viserion dismissed any notion of such accolades falling upon them. The mere thought of Rhaegal potentially lurking in the cabin, consuming rats, filled him with revulsion, yet the crew's improved disposition toward them was undeniable, and Viserion acquiesced to it. Nevertheless, he still found Rhaegal's demeanor unclean. Every time the copper-hued dragon leapt upon him seeking play, he would invariably submerge him in the seawater for a thorough wash. Drogon flew far and was often absent, while Rhaegal busied himself with hunting rats, leaving Viserion the sole dragon gliding along the ship's edge, ever within Dany's line of sight. Or rather, one might say, Dany was perpetually within Viserion's gaze. He remained oblivious to Illyrio's machinations, as well as the intricacies surrounding Buse and Disdain, merely observing from the sidelines. The robust Buse, a corpulent eunuch, comported himself with the demeanor of a child, seemingly lacking in intellect. The white-bearded Disdain, who claimed to serve Buse, was older and far more composed, exhibiting a knightly grace in his movements. Their peculiar pairing was indeed strange, yet having heard that they had rescued Dany, Viserion could not sense any malice from them. Strangely enough, the individual who aroused Viserion's wariness was Jorah Mormont, recently appointed as the chief knight of the Queen's Guard. He did not fear Jorah's betrayal. On the contrary, since boarding the ship, the intensity of Jorah's gaze had become ever more evident. Viserion understood that Dany would undoubtedly remarry, but her husband must be a man of her equal, a true lord and warrior, one who could benefit her and the return of House Targaryen. The exiled Jorah Mormont clearly did not fit this description. He could love his queen as all should love her, yet he ought not to harbor unwarranted fantasies. As Viserion once again thwarted Jorah's attempt to enter Daenerys' chamber, she simultaneously apologized to Jorah, saying, "I am sorry. You know Viserion has never held you in high regard. Please leave for now. We shall discuss matters tomorrow." At the same time, she admonished, "Viserion, enough. What are you doing? Stop this at once." Viserion, maintaining his composure, sought to strike Jorah's face without causing significant harm. The knight, suppressing the urge to draw his sword, shielded his eyes with one hand while the other attempted to grasp the white dragon and cast it aside. He muttered curses under his breath, unable to restrain himself any longer. "Daenerys, this dragon has gone mad. You should confine him." Viserion observed Daenerys' expression darken. "You ought to address me as your grace." This marked Jorah's final attempt to breach Viserion's defenses. However, he remained the queen's most loyal and sole advisor. During the day, Daenerys often conversed with him on the deck, occasionally joined by Astapor. Viserion soared above the sea, keeping a distant watch over the deck without concern for their discourse. It was not until more than a month later that they finally reached their destination. Viserion realized that Pentos was not at all as he had envisioned. In truth, it was not Pentos at all. He watched the Dothraki disembark with trepidation, hearing the port referred to as the Bay of Slaves. Wait, what has happened? The Bay of Slaves? Why is it called the Bay of Slaves? Confounded, Viserion trailed beside Daenerys, taking several days to glean the situation from their conversations. He had trusted Illyrio as a faithful friend, but upon learning of their journey to Pentos, he ceased to concern himself with Daenerys' decisions. It was only upon disembarking that he discovered Daenerys had altered their course midway, redirecting them to the slave city of Astapor. This was Jorah's counsel. Believing it prudent for Daenerys to possess her own army to escape the confines of reliance upon others, thus suggesting she procure Unsullied in Astapor. The Unsullied, a class of valiant and formidable warrior slaves, could be traded for Illyrio's spices and other goods aboard the vessel. Although Viserion was somewhat discontented, he considered it a viable approach, yet Astapor vehemently opposed Daenerys' use of slaves. Astapor, true to his title of the white-bearded elder, was remarkably obstinate. Rather than solicit assistance with trepidation, he believed it far more effective to purchase their loyalty, asserting that their fidelity surpassed that of mercenaries. What shame lay in waging war with slaves? No matter how noble the knight, could victory be assured? They docked at the harbor, yet few ventured ashore. They merely procured necessary provisions and supplies from the land. Yora volunteered to liaise with the master of the Unsullied, while the three young dragons remained confined to the ship and the sea. Daenerys forbade them from setting foot on the dock, fearing potential dragon slayers in the ancient city. Coincidentally, Viserion shared no interest in the brick-red locale, reeking of dust and decay. The dragons were far better suited to soar across the vast ocean than contend with the crowded dock. Soon, Yora established contact with a slave trader. Truly, one cannot help but acknowledge the expertise of a former slave trader, thought Viserion. His skills were indeed remarkable. Yora lacked the authority to make decisions. Thus Daenerys had to personally negotiate with the slaver. Accompanied by Astapor and 2 members of the Blood Riders, she set foot on the land of Astapor, leaving her 3 young dragons confined below deck. Over a month of maritime voyage had dulled Viserion's vigilance. He had not anticipated Daenerys would resort to imprisoning the dragons. It was only upon the closure of the overhead door that he reacted. Drogon and Rhaegal regained their senses, attempting to grasp the last vestiges of light. Yet Viserion emitted a furious roar. She cannot do this. No one can imprison true dragons. Patience, I shall return swiftly. As Daenerys's footsteps and voices faded into the distance, Viserion's anger intensified. Previously, he had tolerated her offenses due to his need for her service, but they no longer required nourishment. He had no reason to endure any longer. Drogon lashed out at the wooden door with his sharp claws, splinters cascading down as deep claw marks marred the surface. Rhaegal opened his mouth, intending to breathe fire. But Daenerys's lesson had left its mark. Instead, only a plume of black smoke emerged. Conversely, Drogon could not contain a burst of flame, which merely dissipated into the air, causing no harm. They truly were obedient, Viserion thought mockingly. They behaved less like dragons and more like dogs. Though he appeared docile, curled in a corner of the room, his resolve had already crystallized. Time passed, and eventually, the battered door was reopened. At the critical moment, Drogon retracted his claws, swirling excitedly around Daenerys. Rhaegal attempted to perch on her shoulder, but Daenerys giggled and evaded him. Viserion observed this tender scene before soaring past them onto the deck. The day waned. The sea deepened, accentuating its vastness. Daenerys Targaryen was the rightful ruler of the 7 kingdoms, the Queen of Westeros. Yet, he too claimed that title. Daenerys despised the slave system of Astapor, yet she desperately needed the Unsullied that the slave masters cultivated. Hypocrisy. Concerned for her dragon's safety on land, she would confine them whenever she needed to leave the ship, the Balerion. After a careless entrapment, Viserion became wary. No matter how Daenerys tempted him, he would never enter a confined space, which left her perplexed. She instructed her maidservants to weave ropes and ensnare Viserion's elongated neck, but the white dragon, devoid of flame, easily severed the fragile bindings with his teeth. The Dothraki surrounded Viserion, who soared high into the air, perching atop the tallest mast. Daenerys, not wishing to harm him, instructed Yora, "Protect my dragon, do not let them stray too far." Yora complied. In the ensuing days, Daenerys and her entourage ventured out several times, during which oddly dressed individuals came aboard to inspect the goods, seemingly close to finalizing a deal. Viserion had overheard Astapor's vehement protests, but none could alter Daenerys's resolve. Rumors aboard the ship suggested that Daenerys intended to sell one of her dragons, yet Viserion found this notion utterly implausible. Even if she were to utter such words, even if her gaze were tinged with bitterness, Viserion remained unconvinced. Drogon was shackled in chains, and Rhaegal confined within an iron cage, while the silver-haired queen stood tall, flanked by the stern-faced, white-bearded Aston. Viserion soared through the sky, eliciting gasps of awe from the crowd below. The semi-nude Unsullied resembled statues, lined up in an orderly formation, remaining motionless under the scorching sun. The corpulent slave masters wielded whips, proudly gesturing about. As Viserion glided overhead, they craned their necks, nearly drooling with desire. Yet beneath their greed lay an undercurrent of fear. They yearned for the dragon, yet they also feared it. They ought to be afraid. Daenerys would not part with her dragons. She could not even bear to sell the crown gifted to her. On this occasion, Daenerys did not restrain her dragons. Instead, she kept them close. Both Drogon and Rhaegal exhibited curiosity towards their unfamiliar surroundings, seemingly unbothered by their confinement, straining to twist their necks for a broader view within their limited space. However, Viserion would not accept such treatment. He feigned disinterest in landing, only following Daenerys from a distance once she had moved away, soaring far above. The wingless humans were powerless against him. A cluster of elegantly attired men gathered, and one middle-aged man suddenly addressed Daenerys. "We desire that white dragon." Before the translator could respond, an older man interjected, "No, the black dragon is larger." The former defended his position. "The white dragon is healthier." Indeed, Viserion remained aloft, while Drogon, though spirited, appeared somewhat less wild, confined within the cage. After a lengthy discussion, a brown-skinned man, adorned with gold tassels along the hem of his robe, made a decisive pronouncement: "The black dragon. Too fierce would not be ideal." Daenerys listened in silence until they reached their final conclusion, as if the object of their scrutiny were of no concern to her. Viserion landed atop the cage, while individuals continuously passed by, tallying the goods Daenerys had brought from the ship. She paid them no mind, receiving the iron chain binding Drogon from Aston. Even Drogon, despite his usual dullness, sensed that something was amiss. He flapped his wings, attempting to flee, but Daenerys' slender wrist remained steadfast. She handed the chain to a burly man, and in return, accepted a uniquely crafted whip from him, rumored to grant its wielder the power to command the Unsullied to perform any task. With 3 ships laden with all manner of cargo, 3 vessels capable of traversing the seas, and one of the last 3 dragons in existence, Daenerys had acquired all the Unsullied from Astapor. The silver-haired queen reiterated, "This whip can compel them to do anything?" The man tethering Drogon grinned broadly, tugging at the iron chain, and boasted, "Of course. Even if you commanded them to sever their own heads, they would not hesitate." "Excellent," Daenerys replied with a light-hearted laugh, her violet eyes shimmering with brilliance. She lifted her gaze towards the struggling Drogon and shouted amidst the flames that soared into the sky. The chaos erupted around them as the chains binding Drogon loosened, and at Daenerys' command, he relentlessly engulfed everything before him in a sea of fire. Shadowy figures writhed and screamed in the inferno, and Viserion joined this gruesome feast of blood and fire. Expressions of triumph, terror, rage, hatred, and despair melted away in the brilliant flames. The acrid scent of charred flesh was hauntingly familiar, as were the contorted visages of the burned. Viserion looked towards Daenerys, but she did not return his gaze. "Kill your masters. Slay those who once held dominion over you. You are free." Daenerys cried out, her peculiar whip raised high, her voice and image resonating before every Unsullied. She ran and shouted, breathless and hoarse, yet unrelenting, intent on etching her voice into the hearts of all present. Gradually, a murmur broke the deathly silence of the Unsullied army, and Drogon soared forth, while Viserion remained rooted, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. He seemed transported back to that day when the Khal of the Dothraki wed the daughter of House Targaryen. The Khal and his blood riders laughed boisterously, while the Dothraki savaged each other below, curved blades splattering blood. A small girl sat alone beside the Khal, witnessing vibrant lives extinguished before her, her expression a blend of panic and helplessness. On that day, he too gazed into the bonfire, perceiving the illusion of his 7 kingdoms through the smoke and flames. Or perhaps it was that day when the Khal melted gold in a pot, the molten liquid cascading down from above. The flames twisted and danced in a terrifying manner, yet Daenerys stood across from them, calm and resolute. The scenes intertwined in an instant. The next moment, Viserion melted the cage imprisoning Rhaegal, roaring fiercely, and Rhaegal responded with a loud cry. The white and green dragons spiraled around each other, gradually distancing themselves from the inferno. At last, Daenerys noticed the situation and shouted, "Viserion! Rhaegal!" The chains binding Rhaegal had been removed, yet he remained vigilantly by Daenerys' side, calling out alongside her. Rhaegal glanced at Viserion, then at Daenerys, hesitated briefly, and then gradually descended back to the ground. Viserion folded his wings, turning away from the sun, and dove fiercely, a brilliant yellow blaze erupting from his mouth, aimed directly at Daenerys. Silver strands of hair billowed behind her as Daenerys instinctively shut her eyes and raised her hands defensively. The heat of the dragon fire seared her arm, yet her skin remained smooth and unblemished. When she opened her eyes, her white dragon had vanished into the horizon. "Viserion!" Despite the distance, he heard her call. Yet he did not look back. He should have protected his little girl, but he did not. He should have incinerated his enemies, yet he refrained. Even as he forgave Daenerys and acknowledged her claim to the throne, he could not relinquish the last vestiges of his pride. Now, Daenerys no longer needed him, nor did he require her. She had gathered her army, and soon, it seemed, she would embark on her path of conquest. He would await her in King's Landing. The dreamlike Victory set sail from Slaves Bay, traversing approximately 6 days before revealing a diminutive island. This isle, characterized by its humidity and frequent rainfall, served as a resting point for birds that traversed the sea. Surrounding the island lay a treacherous ring of submerged reefs, rendering it largely uninhabited. Viserion had visited this small island during his journey, and now he returned. The creatures inhabiting the island still recalled the terror instilled by the dragon's dominion, scattering in fear. Yet how could Viserion allow them to evade him? He required sustenance, space, and time to augment his size and strength. When the island's denizens could no longer fulfill his daily needs, he set forth westward, akin to his ancestor, the conqueror Aegon. The strait remained as expansive as ever. Yet it posed no challenge for him. The sailors aboard the merchant vessel gazed upwards in stupefaction as a colossal shadow swept over them, obscuring the sun's radiance. The creature's lithe form unlike anything they had ever encountered. What was that? A dragon? Surely, this was no jest. However, the tales of dragons spread like wildfire from the shores of Dorne, the Riverlands, and the Vale, rivaling Viserion's own swiftness. Fragments of a long-forgotten common tongue echoed in his ears. The map of the Seven Kingdoms had long since taken root in Viserion's mind. Yet having departed from this land at the tender age of 5, his knowledge of its landscapes remained scant, compelling him to pursue a singular direction. Unaware of Daenerys' army's whereabouts, he had yet to witness the ravages of war as he soared through the skies. The dragon's silhouette flickered above, and most merely marveled, lacking the terror he had anticipated. By nightfall, he alighted upon a mountain to rest, having hunted a wild boar for sustenance. Even an audacious soul attempted to seize this rare beast while he dined, only to meet a fate of being charred to ash at Viserion's merciless hands. They had forgotten their reverence for dragons. Viserion intended to rekindle that memory within them. After 2 days and nights, Viserion at last beheld familiar sights. It was the place of his childhood, his Red Keep. The Red Keep appeared less imposing than he remembered, appearing merely as a crimson speck in his field of vision. The citizens of King's Landing were caught unawares, engrossed in a grand wedding celebration, the streets thronged with jubilant crowds, each face alight with excitement and joy. It seemed the entirety of King's Landing had poured into the streets. Even from a distance, Viserion could discern the masses, their attire and demeanor no more refined than elsewhere. He gradually descended, the immense and wondrous creature swiftly capturing the attention of the throng. Look, good heavens! The already agitated crowd became even more frenzied. Yet their emotions took a dramatic turn. Viserion hovered in midair, observing as the once orderly sea of humanity devolved into chaos. People ran, shouted, shoved, and fell, their screams and cries merging into a cacophony. The common folk lost their composure, and the beautiful bride and handsome groom turned pale. They were indeed two exquisite beings. The man possessed golden curls, while the woman had cheeks reminiscent of dew-kissed roses. Adorned with splendid crowns that signified their exalted status, they were a sight to behold. Viserion caught sight of the crown, a delicate and intricate golden diadem embellished with rubies and black diamonds, a design he had never encountered before. This crown bestowed upon its wearer the dignity of a sovereign. While the common folk screamed in terror and fled, the bride too wished to escape, yet he remained steadfast, his finger pointing at the furious dragon, shouting, "Come forth." A knight clad in white robes drew his sword, resolutely positioning himself before the king. The queen urged the king, who was eager to fight, to depart from this perilous place immediately. More individuals were hastening towards them, all intent on safeguarding their monarch. Yet the true king stood directly before them. Viserion expected to feel immense rage, yet he found it amusing, for he was acutely aware of his overwhelming power. Flames engulfed the young couple adorned with crowns, along with the royal guards standing before them, all reduced to charred remains. This was the wrath of a true dragon, the retribution of a genuine monarch. The cries grew louder, a woman's voice piercingly sharp, "Little Joffrey." Every soul daring to obstruct his path faced annihilation. The beautiful woman with golden locks, her one-armed handsome counterpart, a diminutive and grotesque dwarf, and the guards in crimson, once they all vanished. Viserion finally found his footing upon the street. The broad thoroughfare was capable of accommodating the royal litter and the throngs of onlookers. However, when he unfurled his wings, the buildings on either side trembled in fear. The scent of burning flesh invigorated him. Viserion had initially intended to eradicate all those who lingered near the king. Yet in his elevated spirits, he was willing to spare a few insignificant mice. They, having been utterly terrified, had long since vanished. The once crowded street was now left with only the acrid scent of charred remains. Viserion patiently awaited the dissipating black smoke, ultimately soaring towards the Red Keep that occupied his thoughts. Perched upon the heights of Aegon's Hill, the Red Keep towered above all other structures. Viserion had claimed this edifice, yet he found himself unable to breach its gates. within the Red Keep. Its occupants either fled in terror or cowered in the corners of their chambers, while the white dragon loomed atop the Maegor's holdfast, unleashing bursts of orange flame all around. In King's Landing, every soul sheltered within their homes peered through the corners of their windows at this inferno, the flame of the dragon. Since that fateful day, Tommen Baratheon found it increasingly difficult to distinguish between dreams and reality. In one moment, his mother was smiling and affectionately ruffling his hair. In the next, she was engulfed in flames. Just a heartbeat before, Joffrey had been taunting him for his weakness. Moments later, he too was consumed by fire. Jaime had been instructing him on the proper grip of a sword, only to be enveloped in flames the very next instant. Tyrion had been recounting tales of dragons, and then he too was lost to the fire. Just before, the gentle Rose of Highgarden had been smiling at him, but in the blink of an eye, she too was reduced to ashes. In the fleeting moment, the dashing Knight of Blossoms was showcasing his splendid swordsmanship, only to be engulfed in flames an instant later. Just moments after being adorned with a pure gold crown, he found himself ablaze. He was still too young, helplessly witnessing all his beloved ones turn to ashes before his very eyes, plunging him into a state of utter confusion and dread. He was afraid of people, of fire, of beasts, and even of the sun. He dreaded everything in this world. The learned man prepared poppy milk for him, yet it could not stave off Tommen's nightmares. The boy grew increasingly frail, raising concerns that they might lose this last king. Fortunately, there was still Tywin Lannister, the steadfast guardian of the West. The hand of the king had become the final pillar of support for the Seven Kingdoms. Simultaneously, to lose all his children was a tragedy sufficient to make even the most devout cleric question the will of the Seven. Yet Lord Tywin Lannister appeared entirely unfazed. At least for the moment. His bald head remained as unyielding as ever, and his pale green eyes were sharper and more ferocious than those of a hawk. In this tumultuous autumn, sentimentality had no place. Since that fateful day, Sansa Stark had gone missing, prompting Peter Baelish to volunteer to retrieve this last legitimate heir of Winterfell. Tywin had always been aware of Littlefinger's ambitions, but at this juncture, his presence in King's Landing was proving to be more troublesome. After all, Winterfell lay far to the north, while pressing matters demanded attention in the capital. Where was that little queen now? Meereen? Yunkai? Astapor? Meereen, his brother Kevan Lannister murmured. From her recent movements, there seems to be no indication of an intent to invade Westeros. Yet her dragons now occupy the Red Keep. Tywin emphasized the words Red Keep, cursing the notion of honor. He should let the Starks see what consequences his mercy had wrought. While Eddard Stark was beyond sight, the young queen of House Targaryen had avenged him. The Queen of Thorns scoffed loudly. Within her withered and diminutive frame resided an inexhaustible energy, and the loss of her grandson and granddaughter only intensified her explosive vigor. In stark contrast, Mace Tyrell, despite his imposing stature and title, had been utterly crushed by the grievous news of his children's demise. He slumped in his chair like a beast fatally wounded. Appearing to age 2 decades in an instant, his eyes clouded with a murky haze. Tywin refrained from commenting on Olenna's sharpness as he instructed Kevan. I want Daenerys Targaryen dead. Whoever it takes, be it a remorseful guest, a water dancer, a warlock, an assassin, a thief, a eunuch, or even a dwarf. Whoever can bring me her head shall be granted a castle by the king. The king? You mean the deceased one? Olenna burst into laughter. Then suddenly her expression darkened. Raise the bounty to 500, no, 1,000 gold coins. Highgarden is willing to pay 1,000 gold coins for the life of the little dragon. Tywin nodded to Kevan. Go. Kevan bowed slightly and took his leave. Olenna, resting her dry hand beneath her chin, remarked, even if the little dragon perishes, that dragon may not necessarily depart. Even dragons are merely beasts, Tywin asserted. What can a beast accomplish without the commands of its master? It does nothing, and neither do you. Firmly, Tywin proclaimed, a Lannister always pays his debts. His fingers trembled as they brushed against the chain around his neck, emblematic of the hand of the king, revealing the emotions he struggled to conceal. The Queen of Thorns and the Old Lion exchanged a glance, their shared sorrow cementing a bond of mutual hatred. From that moment forth, they became the most steadfast of allies. Epilogue. Dragon Slayer Viserion did not aspire to reduce the entirety of King's Landing to ashes. His desire was solely to incinerate his adversaries. However, upon seizing the Red Keep, he began to hunt the livestock tended by the farmers, incinerating anyone who dared to resist, instilling an overwhelming fear among the populace, which prompted a mass exodus. In a short span, the vicinity of King's Landing transformed into a desolate wasteland, marked by charred remnants and devoid of life. The Lannisters temporarily relocated with the newly appointed young king to Casterly Rock, while the Tyrells established their base in a nearby town. Numerous attempts to organize dragon-slaying expeditions yielded no success. A scholar devised a contraption capable of launching massive crossbow bolts with tremendous force and remarkable range, which Kevin communicated to Tywin, who prepared for a renewed assault with this newfound assurance. Concurrently, Olenna dispatched agents to feed livestock near King's Landing with tainted provisions, even scattering drug-laced bait in the woods. Recently, there had been reports of villagers succumbing to sudden heart attacks. Upon receiving news that Viserion had seemingly conquered King's Landing, Daenerys was struck with a mix of alarm and exhilaration. Yet she resolved to embody the essence of a true queen. Despite her longing, she could not withdraw. She commanded Yora to travel to Westeros as her royal envoy, proclaiming her imminent arrival while aiding Viserion's governance. However, upon his arrival in King's Landing, he discovered that Viserion had already perished. Tywin personally stripped the scales from the white dragon's neck, pierced by a spear, while Tom and I, crowned and trembling beneath the bloodied skull, heard the jubilant cries of the populace, protector of the Seven Kingdoms. King Tommen,